Hi, I'm Julie Ross,
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
and you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
And look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging to say the least. But with a few skills under our belts, we just might be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Parenting Horizons podcast. We're doing a special episode today, just like the old days. It's just Julie and I this time, no guest. How you doing,
Which is
Julie?
delightful, Greg.
It's nice.
I mean, I love our guests. I think they're brilliant and amazing, but it is really nice to just be you and me every once in a while.
Yeah, I agree. And we've been lucky. We've continued to have people reach out, so we are lining up. New guests are coming. We have a bunch in the docket. So that's exciting, but it is always nice also just to talk you and I.
Yeah.
And we were kind of batting around because when Julie and I do this where like we could have a guest, but maybe not, and then when it came down to just her and I said to her, like what should we talk about? We kicked around a couple of things. I kind of landed on drugs and alcohol
Mm-hmm.
and talking to your kids about drugs and alcohol, how that plays out in adolescence. Mostly because I was thinking about my own kids. I've gone through it now. Now my son is 24. I have a daughter that's 19, and I have a daughter who's 16. So we've kind of been through it with all three of them. Although I will say, and part of the reason I brought it up to Julie is that we're in Michigan this summer, and my 16-year-old is just at that time where there's some experimentation going on and kids are drinking. I mean, that's just what's happening. So it's sort of been at the forefront of my mind. So I guess my first question for you, Julie, is when do you start this conversation? Because I will also say my own personal experience is that my parents didn't really talk to me a lot about drinking, which I think can be sort of classic too. Although I'm sure you're going to touch on this, I think the less communication that just leads kids to, I
Yeah,
mean, I
for
didn't
sure.
go crazy, but I definitely kind of was just figuring it out on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that was problematic, let's just say.
Sure.
So,
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
uh, so what would you say? Is there a specific age? Do you vibe it out by the kids? When do you think you should start talking to your kids about drugs and alcohol?
Well, I think we really have to look at kind of the common age at which drinking and use of marijuana and vaping starts.
Oh yeah, that's the other one and we can touch on that too. I know you've been giving workshops on it because I feel like that's a huge one, maybe even before drinking. Because I feel like in middle school, my youngest is now going into her junior year, but I feel like she was talking about seventh, eighth graders, maybe even younger.
Yeah.
We're in New York City. I don't know if it's more common because of that, because it's easy for them to get. They can walk into delis. But even before drinking, there's a lot of vaping, right? Are you finding
For
that?
sure. Vapes are very inexpensive. They're easily accessible. And some of the studies now are showing that vaping, that kids as young as 7 have tried vaping.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Well, the other thing that's
Mhm.
scary with the pen, and I mean, I sound like an old dad because I don't totally know, but it's the weed pens. I think the other thing is now they're really easy to bring into school because it's not like you have to light a joint or
Right.
pack a bowl. You can literally hit your weed, go to the bathroom and hit your weed pen. And my kids have talked to me about there are kids that are like literally stoned the whole day they're in
Yeah,
school because it's so easy to do now, whether it's
exactly.
edibles or weed pens or whatever.
Exactly. So vaping is, I think, high priority of concern, should be high priority of concern for parents. 7 years old is young.
Yeah.
And I think the bulk of kids who who experiment with vaping actually falls out at about the same age that kids start experimenting with alcohol or experimenting with weed, which is somewhere between 11 and 13 years old.
Wow. That feels really young. Experimenting with weed and
Cor
alcohol, drugs and alcohol, maybe.
correct.
Experimenting.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, the first time they try something is usually between the ages of
Hmm.
11, 13.
Like, even if they just try a sip or something, they don't necessarily get drunk, but it's around or they're gonna try it.
Correct,
Wow.
correct.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that, parents have to understand is, parents often come to me with the question, "How can I keep my child from trying this stuff? How can I prevent it?" And
Right.
s
That feels kind of naive, but
Well,
okay.
yeah, sadly, it is
Right.
naive. Sadly, you can't prevent it. The moment they have any kind of freedom, even if they're going to school, you know, when I was growing up, there were kids who brought thermoses that had vodka and orange juice in them.
Vodka. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and so it's something that I think the first step for parents when they're thinking about this is to understand that your child will try this. Not necessarily the vaping, but definitely one of the 3. Either alcohol, weed, or vape, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I also think and it may come at different times. I mean, one of our kids was pretty straight edged, I guess, that you felt like they're not going to, and they even talked about that, and they didn't want to, and that changed on a dime. Like, I think that can be really and that's something you have to be in touch with too, that you can't fall into this, I'm not gonna worry about it. I also feel like I mean, and maybe this is elemental, but this idea, like if you come at it like, how do I get them to never do this? The more you lock it down,
Right.
I just feel the more they're gonna, how can I figure out how to do this and lie my ass off to my
Mhm.
parents
Mhm.
so I can do it,
Right,
right?
right. And, I think it's also important to understand that it doesn't matter what the drinking history in your family is or the
You mean whether you have alcoholism or not,
or
or whether
whether
you
or
drink as
whether
a
you
parent or
drink,
not?
the parents that I work with, the number of parents who they do not have alcohol in their house, they don't like it or whatever, versus the ones who are big partiers, right?
Right.
Versus the ones who have never tried weed, versus the ones who smoke regularly. The kids from those families are equally likely to experiment.
So you can't use it as a barometer, like, hey,
Mm-mm.
we don't drink,
No,
and
you can't.
or my father was an alcoholic, so my I got to be really careful because my kid could spiral off, and
Yeah, and
none of that's necessary.
right. That I we can't look at those things and feel self-assured, We
Mm,
have to we have to operate from the position that my child will try this.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And and then what happens is education is the best prevention. So
mm-hmm,
the more you educate, the earlier you educate, the more information you give your child, the better choices
mm-hmm,
they can make. So educating them about weed, educating them about alcohol, educating them about vaping remains crucial to them making those good decisions. Again, it's not going to prevent it. Our goal is not generally to prevent these things, but to help our children postpone them for as long as possible. Because it is true.
right,
Yeah, it is true that
right.
the younger age at which a person drinks alcohol or ingest any kind of substance, the more it interferes with normal brain development.
Right, right, which you have said goes on till a child's 25?
Yes.
Wow, yeah, it's a
and
long
and
time.
there's no way that you're going to prevent a 21-year-old from drinking. But if you can help them postpone it until they're of legal age to use these substances, their brain development has much more of a chance of proceeding in a normal way.
I mean, so if you're saying they I I think of a couple questions. First of all, that if you're saying experimentation can start around 11 to 13, then I mean, I guess it depends on the child and the family, but when do you start this conversation with them?
I think starting it sooner rather than later is really important. I mean, I wouldn't say you have to have the conversation with a 3-year-old, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Right.
Although you can define, let's say beverages as those are for grown-ups and these are for kids. Just to kind of get them thinking in terms of really the legality of it. And then, when they before they hit
Puberty?
yeah, before they hit puberty, before they even hit the end of elementary school, I think 4th grade is kind of a
Right.
good juncture to start talking about it, and the way that you start talking about it probably is gonna be determined by whether or not you yourself engage in these substances in front of your kids, right?
Mm, mm. Right.
Um
Because they might have some questions about it too.
Mhm.
I mean, would you say, because we talk about curiosity all the time, and I'm already just imagining, like, okay, like if you have this conversation, would you start with a question? Would you start with, hey, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this. What do you know about it? What do you,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes, and I would say, listen, I don't wanna pretend that you don't know anything. I don't wanna pretend that you don't know anything.
Right.
I want to, you know, but I wanna give you the opportunity to tell me what you know so that I can fill in any gaps that there might be.
Mm-hmm.
Another way to talk about some of this is if you have experienced the loss of a family member because of one of these things, the loss is something your children will know about. Like, for example, my stepfather died at age 60 and
From
from alcohol and tobacco abuse or the complications associated with alcohol and tobacco abuse. And so my kids were very much in the thick of at that age when he died, they were at the ages where, some of that experimentation was happening amongst their friends. And I didn't pull any punches. I said, "Listen,
right. This is what
yeah,
happened.
your grandfather died because he, he ate too much butter, he drank too much alcohol, and he smoked 5 packs a day or something, ridiculous." And I said,
Right. Right.
"This didn't
Right.
have to happen." And it's an important warning sign, or an important life event where you don't wanna shield your children from what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it also sounds like, just in the way you're talking about it, and I feel like this is something we talk about a lot too, is kind of tone and how you're approaching.
Mhm.
Because even to say like, yeah, I think it's absolutely true. That's going to affect your brain development, but it feels like if you come with a heavy hammer and you fear monger, like it's not about terrifying them into not doing it. It's just kind of laying out, sort of in the same way that you talked about your stepfather. It's like, yeah, well, he died from alcoholism.
Right,
It seems like, hey, listen, this is what it is. Like, you'll have to reach a point where you're making your own choices. We can't follow you around.
right.
Hopefully parents aren't doing that. I don't know. Is that what it's about? Because it is about, I also feel like we always talk about, like, how do you give the child agency even at that age? Like, if you're talking in 4th grade, that's why, like, you talk about starting with questions. What do you know about
Mhm,
this? What do you think?
mhm.
What are your Okay, well, let me fill in these gaps.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, maybe it is obvious that if you come in with a heavy hand and, all the terror around it and really trying to lock it down, I just have to imagine that would backfire.
It will. I mean, I think in no uncertain terms, it will backfire because it becomes the forbidden fruit. It's like, "Ooh,
Right.
you can't." And then
Right.
you combine that with what happens in pre-adolescence, which is they develop this very powerful drive to be independent and be different from you, if you're coming down heavy-handed, what better way to be independent? What better way to be,
Right.
different from you than to do the opposite of what you're saying? So you're feeding the drive, and that's going to be a disaster, right?
Well, I had a friend. We're in Michigan this summer. We have a friend up here, and she told me the other day. I mean, she's in her 50s now, but that she became the most incredible liar. She was so good at it
Really?
because she said her parents were so
Yeah.
strict about all of that stuff that she just became so wily because, like you said, like it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. And it seems like everything else that we talk about, whether it's drugs and alcohol or sex or relationship problems or your depression or anxiety, that I always have felt, and not that we haven't done it perfectly, but isn't the goal to present information and then hopefully keep an open line of communication and dialogue around the experience of these things?
Yeah.
Is it
A-
same idea with this?
Absolutely. To say, in effect, to say to your children, I know that you're going to be curious about this, or I suspect you're going to be curious about this. I suspect that at some point you'll be tempted to try it. So I want you to make the best decisions that you can. And
Hmm.
here's what you need to know. And of course, for each of the different substances, it's a little bit different what they need to know. Certainly with regard to weed and, pills and that kind of thing, fentanyl is a big problem.
Oh, yeah. It's really scary.
Yeah, and so, so you need to talk about that, and
Yeah.
you need to talk about what to have with you so that if for some reason you or a friend is overdosing, what can you do?
Right.
It's
Right.
very frightening.
Right.
If you're talking about vaping, the kids need to know that vaping is probably the most serious of all of these things, with the exception
Why would you say that?
with the exception of the fentanyl laced substances, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because vaping is the most addictive of all of them.
It is, right?
Mhm. Yeah, because whether you're talking about weed or you're talking about tobacco, the amount of nicotine, let's just say from tobacco, that you
Yeah,
get
yeah,
from one hit of a vape
right.
is astronomically higher than the amount you get from a single cigarette.
Wow.
So it's very, 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 very dangerous. Vaping is very, very, very dangerous.
Just because of the addictive nature of it, and then it becomes the coping mechanism for the child, right? Because like anything, any substance that you get used to cope emotionally, to get through the school day.
Correct.
Yeah, I feel like we missed that one a little bit. I know my kids experimented with it, and we talked to them about it mostly around that idea. Like, listen, it's going to be so annoying because it's so addictive. It's going to be hard to stop. So I don't know. Can you just, talk a little bit more about vaping because it seems like such a big deal now. Have you had parents come to you and say like, now it's all day, every day?
Yes.
They're What do you do? What do you do in that situation with
Well,
vaping? Is it
it's
really hard to
it's
break?
very hard to break, and you have to have buy-in from the person who is addicted. So, because kids get hooked on these substances for a variety of usually emotional reasons,
Hmm.
they want to lubricate.
They have anxiety at school
Yeah, so
or
they want to lubricate
right, right,
socially so they feel a little
right.
looser. ADD is a big one that they self-medicate
Mm,
around.
mm, sure.
So this kind of self-medication that happens, kind of pulls them into the addictive process. And then, I mean, I can't tell you how many parents that I speak to whose kids have gotten hooked on vaping are really, really struggle to get off of it. And the first step, unfortunately, is to get them to buy in to the fact that they need to stop. Because if you're using it for
Right.
self medication, why would you stop something that makes you feel
Yeah, yeah,
better?
of course.
You know?
Well, it's also like even with AA, like, you can't force person to come into that program. Like, they do have to choose it themselves. So, I mean, it sounds very complex. You gotta really show up for that,
Yeah.
right? Because and I imagine if that line of dialogue isn't open, there if the idea is like, "Oh, I caught you, now stop, this is evil," like, I would think you'd have to, like, set up a program to, like and first of all, also get the kid to buy in and also figure out, hey, what is underneath this that you feel like you need to vape every day to get through your day? Like what's going on? Which that's a whole other conversation that you have to have. Maybe
Mhm.
there's some therapy that the child might need. And then I would imagine with vaping, like any addictive cigarettes, it's hard to stop cold turkey. I think you'd almost have to set up a weaning program, right? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah, it's I think with vaping especially, if you're addicted, it's impossible to stop cold turkey. You have to use
right?
patches or you have to use something that, that will slowly bring down, especially if it's nicotine, the nicotine level. And all of that being said, I think what you said that's the most important thing is that the lines of communication have to be open, because I guarantee you the moment if the first time you talk to your child about any of these things is because you find something in their room, it's not theirs. Greg, it's not theirs. It's a friend's. I'm
Right.
holding it for a friend.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, of course, of course. I've
You
been there.
get
Right,
severe denial across the board. And then how do you have an open conversation? Mom, Dad, I know all about that. I'm not doing it. I wouldn't do that. You just get a big, blockade pulled up, which is why it's important to start talking about it before they do this. And to say, "Listen, I know that this is around. I know that your peers maybe have tried some of this already." And,
right,
if not now, at some point, I have no doubt that you will be tempted to come around to this, to try it as well. And here's kind of what you need to know.
right. Well, because if they do get into trouble, like they're out one night and they have too much to drink, or they smoke pot, or they're just in a compromising situation, but if it's a fear-based relationship, they're not coming to you,
No,
right?
no.
They're gonna turn to anyone else besides
Yeah,
you. Um,
exactly.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, it becomes, say talking about vaping. What is vaping? Why is it attractive? You know? And
Mm,
and really that's the most harmful. And if they want to experiment with nicotine, they should do it by smoking a cigarette.
mm.
And that's a hard one.
But still, you can talk about yeah, because when you say that, I'm like, "Oh my gosh." But again, like, you have to talk about all the dangers that come with that. I mean, I was never a big smoker, but I did smoke, and I think you've mentioned this too, is talking about your own experience and why it became problematic, why it's not great for you. Like, I've been able to talk to my kids about marijuana, because I've had some friends, and I smoked in college, so I've tried to share my own experiences and have said like, most of the people I know who smoked it regularly, it didn't end well.
Yeah.
It didn't really end well for them. But again, it's about like, hey, this is my feeling about it. This is why I think you have to be careful. This is why, this is some of my personal experience. This is some of my experience with my friends. You have to make your own choices. Obviously, I can't, I keep saying I can't follow you. I don't really believe in this 360 thing. That's my own personal
I
thing, this
don't
kind of
either.
tracking your kid every
No,
second.
I don't either.
Right, because I also feel like you said, there is a natural separation that's supposed to happen in adolescence going into high school, that they seek independence, that they make their own decisions. So I feel like what I've learned from you in doing all of these episodes, it's like, how do you hover there? Or hover is not even the best word. How do you be there as a support to kind of hold them as they kind of go off and try to grow up, right?
Yeah. I'm not a big believer in the 360 either, particularly because I think it qualifies as overprotection,
Mhm.
and kids are going to chafe against that. So that they
Right.
find ways to get around the whole life 360 thing. I also think it creates unnecessary anxiety for parents, because it's not always accurate.
You're not we were just talking about this with the electronic, like, you're not disconnected from them ever,
Ever,
right?
ever. And, and it causes parents anxiety. I'm reminded of a story where, a mom was tracking her daughter, and the Life 360 showed the daughter in the middle of Central Park
Mhm.
at 1 AM. Okay, so Central Park, for the listeners who don't live in New York City, is this huge wooded area. It's beautiful and safe most of the time, but never at night.
You don't really wanna be
Bad
there at
things
1 in the
happen in the
morning,
middle of the night.
especially if you're a child.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
1 AM, mom goes frantic, hysterical, finally calls the daughter, and the daughter picks up, and the daughter's like, "Mom, what are you talking about? I'm at my boyfriend's apartment," which was close to the park. But I'm
Hmm.
and sure enough, that's where she was. Life 360 had thrown her into the middle of the park.
Oh.
I think, it's long been noted that overprotection is detrimental to a child becoming self-sufficient and independent. And included in that umbrella is they have to learn to make their own choices. So if we come at them and say, "You must never, I will lock you up for the rest of your life," kind of thing, that's not helping them learn to make their good choices. They need to take the information that we provide for them, and that usually schools will provide for them as well, about
Mhm.
substances in this case,
Right.
and synthesize it for themselves and say, "You know what? That seems too risky for me." Or, "You
Hmm.
know what? If I have a beer, that's very different from having
Hmm.
a red Solo cup full of vodka."
Right.
So, we also have to remember part of our education for kids, has to center around what proportions look like. You know, what
Right.
what a portion of something looks like, because kids very often will confuse, pouring a beer into a red Solo cup, which will fill the Solo cup up, with any
Sure.
other kind of alcohol, which is a whole
Sure.
different alcohol by
Yeah, yeah.
volume thing. So
Right.
some of the education that we can do as parents is logistical, you know? Buy a red Solo cup. Show what 16 ounces of beer or 12 ounces of beer looks like in it.
Right, the difference between a Truly and vodka and this, I mean, my daughter went to a party recently where they had one of those crazy, I forget what it was, they called it like passion punch, but it had like 180 proof Everclear and, it was totally dangerous and tasted like pink lemonade,
Yes.
and she said like a bunch of kids got sick. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that piece is important, and I also just wanna say, because I think there are a lot of parents that use Life 360, or they have their kids' location, and I guess I would just say that, to me, it would be like trust till trust is broken, maybe? This idea like, hey, because I'm not against maybe using that if you have a kid that constantly lies about their
Yeah.
whereabouts, or constantly doesn't come home on time and doesn't check in,
Right.
or yeah, tells you they're there and they're not, and you kind of find that, and that's an issue that grows, that you might have to say to the child, like, listen, until you can show me you're responsible to do this, I'm going to track you. Why? Because you don't tell the truth. You're
Right.
not responsible.
Right.
And we might have a disagreement about where you should go or what time you can be home, but we need to have a discussion about that. You don't just get to do it. And then maybe you work towards, like, back to independence. And I guess I say that because, to me, it's the same way, because I don't want it to sound like you or I are being cavalier about drugs and
Not
alcohol. And
at
it's like,
all.
yeah, you just experiment and hey, you need independence. I think all of that is true, which would lead me to, because in the same way in Life 360, that, let's say you go through an experience with a child that doesn't come home, doesn't tell you where they are, lie, maybe you would use it, and then use that as a tool to get back to, listen, I don't really want to track you. And when you show me you can be responsible and in communication, I don't really want to. So I guess my question would be, let's say your child has the normal experimentation, you have this line of communication, but it reaches a point. And have you had parents talk to you about this? Like, what is the line between normal experimentation and this is a problem? This is an issue. This keeps getting repeated.
Sure. Yeah, I want to underscore what you just said, Greg, which is trust until trust is broken is a very important part of parenting. And when trust is broken, you can pull the reins in with the idea that they can earn your trust back, and you'll gradually give them that independence again. And the question of how much is too much, I don't know that it's so hard to answer.
You know what I mean? You think it's gonna be kind of obvious where like, yeah, yeah, sure, that makes sense.
Right. I mean, I feel
You'll
like
be able to vibe it.
you'll know. If your kid is, going out and partying hard on the weekends, but doesn't really come home drunk or high, um, you know,
Doesn't affect their
doesn't
schoolwork
affect
or
their
their social life, or
right.
you don't pick up on isolation or depression.
Correct. Then it's not something that I would say you should it's something I would say you should keep an eye on, but not overly worry about. There are signs of overuse of any of these substances. For example, marijuana. And, our younger listeners are going to laugh at my use of the word marijuana.
Yeah.
Let me revise that. Weed, with the use of weed,
Weed.
it can, weed has a tendency, or can make overuse of weed can make people paranoid.
Right. Sure,
So
of
the
course.
moment you see those signs in your kid,
Right, right.
that's problematic. And you just have to assume that, there's something going on and that they need help. If your kid comes home blackout drunk, that's going to be
Mhm.
a problem. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe once is not a problem
Right, once. Sure.
because every kid, you know, I mean, I'm sure
Drinks too
everybody,
much.
every kid
Has a
has a
night.
night.
Right,
What I would
right,
say to the parents of that kid is it's really important to let the consequences, the natural consequences of that,
right, right, right.
work to your advantage. So,
Mhm.
what that means is, if they're blackout drunk, you need to make sure that they stay awake so they don't vomit on themselves, and
Mhm.
inhale the vomit. You need to make sure that, that you can go in and wake them up periodically. And generally speaking, their gut will void all of that and they'll vomit into the toilet. That's such a great experience. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, m-
Combined with the next day when you feel like you just were run over by a truck and wish you could die,
exactly.
because a lot of us have been there, in
And
our youth.
the problem, one of the problems can be that parents can ruin that by saying, I told you you shouldn't get drunk.
Right,
I
right,
told you
right.
so. Those words, I told you so, ruin the consequences, the natural consequences of anybody's actions. So it's better to say, you see, sounds like you feel pretty crummy. It's, you know, it's really hard. I get it. Use empathy, be present for them.
Well, oftentimes I feel like, I mean, my experience with my own kids was that they already felt, they weren't defiant about it. They felt bad or they made a mistake, you know what I mean? And they already kind of knew that. And I do feel like I do want to share one story just because it's kind of funny and then see your take on it. Because yeah, yeah, I guess just the idea that the natural consequences is part of it, as opposed to coming down hard on them. But then, like you said, I think you have to be tuned into if this is repeated
Correct.
behavior. Like you said, if you come home really drunk one night and get sick, I mean, I did that a a handful of times in high school, as like many people did,
Yes, of
right? So that
course.
seems sort of a natural experimentation. It might happen if you have an open line of communication. Hopefully, in the next day, you'll be able to say, like, "Hey, what happened last night? That was kind of crazy. Where were
Mhm.
you? What did you drink? And kind of have that post mortem. And it doesn't mean you don't care, or you're cavalier about it. You can. It's a time to kind of reinvestigate, like, these are the things you have to watch out for. This could be problematic. You're if you, especially if someone blacks out
Right.
drinks, that's really scary. So if it's repeated behavior, it sounds like, of course, And it sounds like you're saying, generally speaking, it's gonna become obvious, and then I think, again, it's like, what's underneath this that a child is feeling that they have to do that? Um, so I will share, so, one of my kids, they were in high school, um, and they came home. It was late. My wife and I were up, and we knew that they were out, and I feel like I remember him even knocking on the door and opening the door, and he was standing there, and he looked like he'd seen a ghost or he'd seen the worst thing he'd seen in his life. He was just standing there, big eyes, and we came in, uh, and he wasn't speaking, and we were like, "Are you okay? Did something happen?" And we were both up, I think, so he came into the room and sat on the couch, still not speaking, and we were getting frightened, like,
Sure.
was he in an accident? Did someone get hurt?
Yeah.
And it took a while. He was really kind of frightened and disorganized. Well, eventually, I think he got sick, and it kinda I can't remember because it was a while ago whether it came I think it came out that night that he was at his buddy's, and they had made weed pasta,
Oh my god.
so they put it in the marinara sauce, and he ate so much that he literally was on another planet and couldn't speak and was also, like, completely freaked
He
out.
dissociated. Yeah, that's
Now yeah,
scary.
he kind of dissociated. So, we knew he was in this panic state, and instead, of course, being like, some cliche of like, "How could you do this? You deserve this. We've talked to you about this." We kind of like got him through the night, and the next day he didn't feel well, but we did kind of revisit like what happened, what was that like? That's kind of crazy,
Mhm.
and I do think, and who knows how it'll play out because they're all still young and it could easily become problematic. But I think because we tried, the other thing is I knew I had my own experience as a teenager. Like I did the same thing,
Mhm.
right? So it would be hard for me to be like, how could you do this? Instead, it was about like, and it doesn't always work this way, but I do think if you can be like, what happened? Like keep this line of communication and that they have their own natural consequences that hopefully that they don't go back and repeat that behavior.
Right, exactly.
And then I think what you're saying is if it does, like if my son had started doing that a couple times a week, I'd be really worried and be like, "Do we need treatment? Does he need a therapist?"
Sure.
So anyway, I guess I just share that as I think hopefully the idea is if you can keep the conversation open, there's going to be some natural experimentation, and if you can make them feel like, "Hey, we want to work through this with you,"
Yeah.
that hopefully it stays in that place and doesn't tip over to something more severe.
Yeah, and I also think that, part of the education experience has gotta be, don't do too much too quickly, because weed pasta or gummies, some of these things are
Yeah,
very easy to take too much of and get to
right.
that such a stoned state that you really can't talk. Similarly with alcohol, if you drink too quickly, then you can get alcohol poisoning, which is deadly. And
Yeah, yeah.
so what does that look like? Well, it depends on what kind of you're less likely to get alcohol poisoning from beer because it's got so many carbs it's filling. But the problem with shots, and this is something parents just need to tell their kids, the problem with shots is that by the time your body registers that you're tipsy, you've done too much.
Mhm.
So if you've done, 6 shots, 12 shots, whatever it might be, which please don't do 12 shots. Don't even do
Oh my
6
gosh, you'd be in
shots.
the
Yeah,
hospital.
you would be in the hospital. And
Yeah, yeah.
and and because it goes in and you're like, "That was fun. I'll toss back another
Right,
one."
right.
And then
I feel
I
great.
feel great. And then all of a sudden you don't feel great and you're passed out and, have to have your stomach pumped. And that's the best case scenario. Um,
Right.
so I think part of that education, like for your kid has to be, listen, everything in moderation, maybe, I mean, I'd rather you not do it at all. And I think that's important for
Yes.
parents
And
to
I think
say,
it's okay to say
"Oh,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'd rather
Yeah,
you not do it at
absolutely.
all. It's very
Don't. Your
risky."
brain's developing. Yeah, absolutely. It's risky in a lot of different ways, and I think that's the thing I wanna keep coming back to, because I think we've hit on this, but this idea that even though there is gonna be natural experimentation, it doesn't mean you're like, "Hey, yeah, you know what? So you drink and you smoke pot. This is part of being a kid." Like, no, I think it's totally okay to say, and like I've said, I've shared stories about myself or my friends where it's become a
Right.
problem, and like, "Hey, I just want you to know." And I think it's also okay to say, like you just said, like, "I'd rather you didn't do this.
Yeah. Ab
I'd rather you didn't do this, and this is why.
Yeah.
But you know what? I can't follow you around. You're gonna have to make your own
Yeah.
choices
Absolutely. And, a lot of
or express disappointment. I'm disappointed.
yes,
It's better
as
than
well.
I'm enraged and you're like, I guess I was gonna add about the experience with my kid that night is like, we didn't ground him.
Yeah.
We didn't say like you have to stay in now for 2
Right.
weeks. You know, I just felt like what's that gonna gain really? Because we didn't wanna make him feel bad. He felt bad. He felt bad physically. He felt bad emotionally. He felt like that sucked. I felt out of control. I felt totally petrified. So it was like I didn't feel the need to be like, "And now for 2 weekends, you have to stay in the house."
Right.
I'd be different if they were defiant or whatever, but we actually had a pretty good conversation
Yeah.
about it and, like, what was that like? What happened? So,
Right,
I don't know.
exactly.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think, it depends. If your child doesn't seem to have internalized the natural consequences of their behavior. So in other words, if you see a repetitive behavior, every,
Mhm.
smoking weed before school every day,
Right,
that
right,
kind of thing, and there are no really natural consequences because they still do fine in school or whatever. Then I think you have to move to, look, I'm concerned about this. I need to make sure that you're not, this is becoming a habit, and I need to make sure that you're capable of breaking that habit. So, for the
right.
foreseeable future, and then you can, XYZ, and then you can earn my trust back by showing me that you're not smoking weed, right, in the mornings.
Hmm.
Um, or, and again, whether it's alcohol, weed, or vaping, it's all about, if there are no natural consequences, you gotta create a consequence,
Right, right.
unless it's occasional. So it's gonna
It's
depend.
hard, it's
It's
complicated.
so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
complicated. It's so complicated, and I think parents sometimes worry that talking about it is giving permission for them to do it.
Yeah, yeah, it's so funny. I was just thinking as you were talking, I was at a party. I think our kids were like in 10th grade. It was at a party with parents, and I was talking to a couple of dads, and somehow it came up. Like, I think I said, like, yeah, I'm, about experimentation. And they both looked at me like I had three heads, like, no way, no, no, my kid's not doing that. But it felt really fear based. Like, if somehow you admit your child might be experimenting, like, it was bizarre. I was kind of like, oh, we're going to pretend like this isn't happening. Like, I found it really strange, and I don't think that's gonna be helpful. I don't think oh, well, and also the thing that reminded me is that even though it might be true, and I already kinda mentioned this too, that I do think it's important to do you don't have to do a weekly check-in, but if you have a kid that's like, "I'm not interested in this, I don't wanna do that," I just because 'cause I've seen in my own kids where that can change very
Oh,
quickly. It
yeah.
could change one night at a
Yep.
party where, like, like I said, one of my kids was really straight edge. "I don't wanna do that. I'm never doing that even," and then suddenly it was like, "Oh, okay, this is
Yeah.
happening." So it seems important to, like, something to revisit over time,
Mhm.
no, not just that one big talk.
Exactly. I mean, I don't believe in the one big talk for anything.
Right, right.
It's a lot of little talks, and it's a lot of, not, I think also one of the things parents make a mistake of believing is that talking to your children means lecturing them. That's going to
Mm,
go
mm,
nowhere. It's got to be a dialogue. It's got to be a dialogue, and it's got to be, you're walking out on the street and you're like, you know, wow, the smell of weed is really prevalent. I mean,
mm.
we live here in the city where it's legal now. So I don't know about you, but every time I turn the corner, I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
even.
Right.
I can be sitting at my desk and it wafts through my window.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But to say that the smell of weed is really prevalent, I'm curious, are any of your friends experimenting with this? Is this something you've tried? The conversations take place best when you're thinking in terms of dialogue and parallel play. You're walking together somewhere. You're
Right. You're in a
in a car.
car. You've always said the car is always good because 'cause you're not looking at
I
each other.
love the car, except I don't have one,
Yeah, the
but
car is really
but
good.
walking down the street can also, serve a purpose. So
Right.
yeah.
Because those are I mean, you'll have those, but they're kinda like, "Hey, let's sit down and talk about that," which you will have to do too.
Yes.
But yeah, anytime you can make them feel like, "Hey, we're in the" which is hard. "We're in the flow. We're just chilling." Like, "Oh, hey, by the way, have
Exactly.
you tried weed?"
Exactly.
It's weird because I feel I don't really love it that weed's legal now. Now we have all these kind of ugly shops, and it just makes it a little more complicated. To me, it's another just more opportunity for conversation because it is now. It's on the street. There's all these stores, and I think especially in the city, like kids they know the places to go to.
Yeah. Well, I think
But I think it's happening. I grew up in the Midwest, and you could figure out a way to get alcohol
yeah.
there. You know what I mean? So
Exactly. I mean, listen, I have very mixed feelings about the legalization of weed, but I think one of the things that to me falls on the positive side of it being legal is that it's regulated now. So,
yeah, yeah, that's true.
I mean,
Right.
the big fear for me was always that a kid would go down to, one of the seedier parks and buy
Yeah,
it
yeah,
off
yeah.
somebody they
And
didn't
it's, like,
know.
laced with PCP or
Yeah,
something. I mean,
and that
I've
happened.
known people that's happened.
Me
Yeah, no, I've
too.
known people that's happened
Yeah.
to, so
So at least now, you walk in now, are you allowed to go into, a dispensary and buy weed if you're under 21? No,
mm,
because you're
mm.
not legal, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
and I listen, I think that's great. But kids find a way around it. They'll get a legal, they'll get a fake ID or whatever.
Do you think there's I mean, I'm sure there is, but isn't there situations where because you mentioned ADD or anxiety, like, especially with weed that kids are using that because it helps them, right?
100%. Hmm. Yeah, I think one of the what do I want to say? Um, Weed is actually medicinal.
Yeah, yeah, no, it is. It
It's
is.
been used with people who have Parkinson's
Sure.
with success. It's been
Right,
used with people who have autism with some
right,
success.
right,
It's been used, and the problem is because it was illegal. This is my understanding. Because it was illegal, they they couldn't do any kind of scientific experiments
right,
to
right.
find out what it was beneficial for, in what amounts, in what doses. Um, Medical marijuana is used widely for pain,
Sure, yeah. Cancer patients,
cancer
anxiety,
patients,
sleeping.
anxiety.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, sleeping. So
But
go
does
ahead.
that mean your 14-year-old should be taking gummies to deal with their ADD?
Uh,
It's a tricky question
no,
because the alternative is what? Pharmaceuticals, right?
pharmaceuticals.
Right?
The alternative is pharmaceuticals, and you know, there there is an argument that says pharmaceuticals are more harmful in the long
Sure,
run than
sure.
gummies.
It's such a
Um,
that seems so complicated to me because it is a slippery slope then because and I think the other thing I wanted to revisit this because this is the idea for me is like with all of this stuff is to me the real question is what is the underlying, right? So if your child's coming
Absolutely.
home is blackout drinking a couple times a week, if your child is smoking weed before they go to school and staying stoned all day, that's the difference between the kid has ADD, so maybe he takes a piece of a gummy to study. No, he's getting stoned all day. To me,
Right.
it's kind of have to deal with that piece of it, but the bigger piece to me is like, okay, what's going on? What's going on?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other advantage of being attuned to our children and having dialogues with them
Mm,
is to know what is their emotional life? What's going on in their emotional life? We know and take care of often what's going on in their physical life, right?
Mm.
We take them to the doctor once a year to get a physical. If they have you know, if they have a virus, we take them to the doctor. We're attuned to their physical health, but often we are not attuned to their emotional or mental health. And that's where we fall short as parents.
Mm.
And that's where our kids seek answers outside of the the legal substances.
Right, or even the family unit or
Mhm.
friends, right? If they're not
Mhm.
finding comfort or answers there, they're gonna I mean, we all do that. You're gonna figure out a way
Yeah,
to cope, to help yourself, right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I'm gonna put you on the spot just like we do all the guests. You don't have to say one thing.
Thank you.
We've had a pretty expansive conversation. So, if there's one or two things that, a parent has just listened to this episode, what do you want them to hold on to maybe is most important around the idea of your kids and talking to your kids about drugs and alcohol?
Um, for me, I think the most important thing is for parents to realize that educating your children around this is not giving them permission to do it.
Mm.
In fact, it has the opposite effect. When we give them the information that they need to make reasonable decisions on their own, they will make better choices. So, with that in mind, if you feel reluctant about, giving them that information, it's okay to preface all of this with, I hope you won't do this.
Right.
I feel like it's dangerous.
Mhm.
I feel concerned about it. And as you said, Greg, I can't follow you around. So here's the information you need to do this responsibly.
Great.
That would be my big one thing.
Okay. I'm gonna write that down and put it in my back pocket so I have it ready. It was great to see you.
Great to see you too.
I love doing it just you and I, but I'm looking forward, like I said, we have great guests coming up. So
We do. I'm
keep
excited.
listening, keep sharing the podcast with your friends. We would appreciate that too. And I'll see you soon, Julie.
Okay. Take care, Greg.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
We'll see you next time.